Hello. Hello, everyone. My name is Nahal Desai. I'm just going to go over some pharmacy concepts. Specifically, this one focuses on hematology. Um, just quick concepts to see if you guys know about any of these. Pretty much simple, like understanding of essential nutrients and different types of deficiencies people might have. First one we're going to talk about in a second here is just going over this overview here. First one here is like iron deficiency, um, you know, vitamin B12, folate, hemolytic, sickle cell, and some of you already heard of these kinds of deficiencies. Um, but we're just going to go over some of these things just to give you a little refresher on certain concepts and understanding like the mechanism and pathophysiology, um, or the anatomy and physiology parts of it. Um, Aplastic anemia and hemophilia and other anemia. So you can see here in the diagram some of the pictures here, pretty much listing down the first couple um, bullet points here, highlighting the different deficiencies. Like the first one, you can see kind of like an iron deficiency anemia picture. And it really doesn't really show much inside of it or anything. We'll take a look more into that. Vitamin B12 and folate, they look very similar in terms of deficiency. Then you got this hemolytic anemia that looks like a splash diagram of like a red blood cell. Hemolytic is, if you take the term, it's basically lytic is kind of like breaking up the red blood cell. It just um, shows kind of like that. So, and the sickle cell is like kind of like a moon shape, kind of crescent shape uh, blood cell here. So you can see that here in this diagram. And then the last one here in this diagram is the aplastic anemia. It looks kind of like a bone. So we'll see more about these different processes and how and what happens when um, these types of deficiencies and anemia occurs as part of the hemolytic um, disease. So, and when it comes to iron deficiency, typically iron by itself is very important. It's a very important nutrient because red blood cells acquire iron, they take iron and use it as a source as part of a hemoglobin structure. And so the hemoglobin normally would use as like a oxygen carrier to different organs in the body. There's liver, there's a brain, there's lungs, everything that requires oxygen, red blood cells travel within the different parts of the body through the arteries, the veins, and delivers that oxygen because a lot of the other cells and tissues require that. So, in the process, um, you can see here when the iron deficiency occurs, you really cannot transport that oxygen because hemoglobin cannot be produced. And so that's why it's an essential nutrient in the body. Typically, one of the things that liver manufacturers or actually uses as like a transporting tool for iron is transferrin iron binding capacity. And that's essentially like a bus. I think of like a lot of students are waiting at a parking lot or waiting at the bus stop, and they are trying to get on bus, and the buses take the students to different destinations. Similarly, the liver is producing these um, types of carriers for iron to be transported to other parts. And so you could see here when iron is taken, it goes through the intestines, goes out through the transporter here in the from that intestine, and that's a DMT2. And then there is a protein or ferroportin that's attached as like a transporter, goes and then it gets carried out by the liver with the transfer iron binding capacity to other wherever it needs to go. Vitamin C, on the other hand, is used as a protector, uh, because what happens is iron sometimes get converted from the Fe2 plus to Fe3 plus, ferrous to ferric, and ferric won't be able to get out of the intestines like ferrous sulfate. So just wanted to point that out. The absorption will be better with vitamin C. So it will prevent the conversion. There's a few other things and the stickiness and the nature inside the intestine that might lead to constipation and other sorts of side effects of that nature. So it's very important to have these two together. It will help with, um, carrying it out and getting absorbed into a bloodstream. Um, and then in this next one here um, is actually showing you a picture of a bone marrow. And I kind of drew a picture of a bone, might not be perfect, but here you can see an enlarged view of a red blood cell. As you can see here, lots of things are happening here. In any kind of cell that you have in a body, you'll usually see that they have different structures. You have ribosomes, you have endoplasmic reticulums, you have, nucleus. Similarly, red blood cells would have those kinds of things too. So in the process, iron is usually transported to the where the bone marrow is, um, and it is actually um, binded to the red blood cell in the process. And you can see here the portoforin ring, which is there, that goes around it as part of the hemoglobin structure. Then you have the globin protein, you have the globin genes that encodes for the globin protein, kind of binds in that structure as well. The ferrochelatase is another part which helps with um, the iron binding capacity to the portoforin ring. So it kind of helps with, the binding here. And whenever you have the globin protein that binds to it, it becomes a hemoglobin overall of the red blood cell. And that gets out into the system and starts working on its oxygen delivery and oxygen transport throughout the other parts of the body. And so hemoglobin by itself as HbA consists of two alpha rings and two beta rings and chains, sorry, four heme groups altogether. So it is very essential to have adequate iron in the body. However, there is one other thing in this previous diagram here. You can see here hepcidin, which is an enzyme that's also made by the body to kind of regulate the amount of iron that the body can allow to be absorbed. So um, you would have to be a little bit careful, but I'm sure the side effects will definitely trigger the thought of iron not being properly absorbed, or maybe there's too much iron capacity or that is in the body right now, so we can't get more absorbed or anything like that. So there is a limit to how much iron can get absorbed is by this enzyme. So just wanted to show you that in this diagram as well. I kind of drew a red dash there to kind of um, show you a view as to what's happening, like a inhibitor of some sort, so that kind of prevents that mechanism from occurring. So that's essentially that. The second thing here is the vitamin B12 anemia. So vitamin B12 is essential uh, in um, specifically in this proper separation or division of those red blood cells. And so whenever you have vitamin B12, this is very simple. It's usually used to help with DNA synthesis, um, encoding like the structures of the red blood cell protein, throughout the, process and becoming more mature inside the body. So that's essentially that. And without that B12, this and DNA synthesis won't properly occur, and then the red blood cells won't be able to divide and produce as much to be used in the body. So that is kind of important. You would see lab values where MCV would increase and then the THF would be lowered. And another thing about THF, it is very equivalent to folate. B12 and folate kind of work together to help the DNA in making those pyrimidines, thymidine. Those are the building blocks used in DNA synthesis for the red blood cell division. Um, on the other hand, B12 is also essential for myelin sheets. Um, so it will help kind of with the nerve transmission or neurotransmission from one neuron to another, and so it can kind of, with that B12, kind of you know cause someone to feel less energetic, probably because of the um, neurons, or that it could be motor neurons or something that's not receiving much transmission because of the um, lack of vitamin B12. So it can have an effect on both the nerve potential and also on the cellular division section of the body when it within the bone marrow. So it's just a quick concept here. Just wanted to point that out. Folate we kind of already discussed. Folate usually converts to THF in the process, which is um, used as part of the DNA purines and the thymidine in the production process of the red blood cell. Um, Hemolytic anemia, very simple. What's happening is that there's more destruction of red blood cells occurring than production. Um, so the red blood cells aren't really becoming fully matured in the stage, and then they get destroyed. Or maybe they aren't matured and then they're just destroyed shortly afterwards, whether it's extravascularly or intravascularly. It could be outside red blood cells as well. So those kinds of things can happen in the process. The spleen is essentially used to destroy old, you know, red blood cells and those things in the process. So whenever there's hemolytic anemia, the spleen could be destroying red blood cell that hasn't fully matured in the process, and that's where hemolysis is occurring. So that's, those kinds of things can happen. Sickle cell disease is basically just a genetic mutation. Glutamate is supposed to, uh, you know, when glutamate converts to valine, there's a mutation, and then that leads to a crescent shape of the red blood cell. And then those kinds of things can block the small vessels um, that carries a lot of other nutrients to other parts of the body and leads to a lack of transportation of important um, substances, proteins, um, fats, or anything that requires transport oxygen as well. So um, this is what occurs here when someone has a sickle cell disease. This is one of the ways damages could occur, and if left untreated, um, it can be potentially fatal. So that's why it's very important to undergo treatment early in the process before it becomes severe. Um, it usually deals with the HBS enzyme here. So just wanted to point it out here for your refresher. Um, the next thing here is aplastic anemia. And that's essentially where the bone marrow is not able to function properly. It's not able to encourage production or help in producing any type of cell, which is red blood cells, mainly white blood cells, or platelets. And those things decrease, and that's very essential. You need red blood cells, white blood cells, platelets. You would also see a decrease in reticulocytes, which is essential, which is a tool that labs use to see how well the bone marrow is working in the body in production of these different types of cells. The next one here is hemophilia. Hemophilia is essentially like a deficiency. I don't know if anybody has ever seen the lecture where I talked about um, platelets and clotting factors. Well, this is essentially what that is. So whenever there is when a patient has hemophilia, it's because they are lacking certain clotting factors, and these kind of clotting factors include factor 8, factor 9. These are hemophilia A and hemophilia B, and in both stages, when there's deficiency, um, blood's not able to clot, or clotting just doesn't occur whenever it needs to. For example, someone having a bruise or a clot, you will see a lot more bleeding because the blood cells are more separated than being together, and tissue clotting and all of that. So normally a patient would have all of these factors: factor 2, factor 1, or factor 12, 9, I'm sorry, factor 12, 11, 9, and 7. And so, 8. And then you would see thrombin and fibrin, which is basically how the clot would happen in normal stages. But when there's a deficiency in factor 8 or 9, then clotting is not really happening. The patient would continuously bleed because there would be, there's no way to hold the tissues or the cells together to uh, form that clot. So, you know, this is more or less like a genetic issue. Mostly genetics play a big role in, the hemophilia stages. But, when it occurs, um, it's it can become pretty fatal later in life if left untreated as well. So it's very important to understand um, these kinds of things. Um, So I thought I wanted to point a few things out just for your own for your knowledge and for your understanding of different types of hemolytic or um, the hematology disorders and diseases. So, and I know some things can be a little bit difficult to understand, so I want to show it to you in these diagrams. You feel free to use them as your reference. You can draw them out yourself. But for your references, I just wanted to point it out so you can see it a little more closely. Um, and if anyone has any questions, please feel free to let me know. And thank you for watching. All right, I'll talk to you soon. Thanks. Bye.